Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you all here with us today for the Rapid Response Program on Leadership Development, Level 1, Lead Self. And today we're doing Module 7, Focusing on Data and Information. As part of my welcome today, I would also like to begin with acknowledging that the National Office of the CFC is on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Isnabwe and Algonquin people. We acknowledge them as the keepers of the Ottawa River Shed and its tributaries. We acknowledge the hurts and harms of the past, as well as the strengths and resilience of the people, and believe working together can make for a better future. And at this point, you are all invited to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat if you would like to do so. Today's session will focus on data and information, and we'll cover limitations, exclusions, on how to start research, types or data, and databases, variables, research, and how to use data, and then even more. At this point, I'd like to pass it over to my co-chair, Chief Paul Bosino, to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you very much, Chief Jones. Hi, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today, whom many of you already know, Dr. Jim Petrik, Fire Chief of Guelph Eramosa, as well as our wonderful Executive Director, Dr. Tina Saryeddine. Dr. Petrik is not only a fire chief, he is also a cancer researcher. He combines his career in cancer research with a leadership position in the firefighting services as fire chief for the Guelph Eramosa Fire Department. The role gives Dr. Petrik the opportunity to bring his cancer research expertise to addressing the alarming increase into the incidence of different cancers amongst firefighters. Dr. Petrik also is a very active member of the CAFC, participating on many of our committees and chairing the Science and Technology Committee. Presenting with him is our wonderful Executive Director, Dr. Tina Saryeddine. Dr. Saryeddine has a PhD in Health Services Management from the University of Toronto and an adjunct facility appointment at the Telfer School of Management, University of Ottawa, not Toronto. But you never know, maybe she's going to come to Toronto too, where she previously completed her master's in health administration. Prior to coming to the CAFC, Tina spent 20 years in the health sector with healthcare providers in regional and national associations. She uses her vast knowledge in research, data, policy, and the association world to help the CAFC bring its needs to fruition as the work to ensure a safe, sustainable, and successful future for the fire sector. So without further ado, let me pass it over to today's presenters, Jim and Tina. Over to you.
Thanks, Chief Wessano and Chief Jones and Annabelle. And it's really fun to be able to be here with Chief Petrik today and take off my ED hat and talk about something that I think both Jim and I are very passionate about. And you're probably thinking like, data? This is going to be fun. Is this a fun way to spend an afternoon in June? And I hope that by the end you'll think, yeah, this is really cool. And anyway, I thought Jim and I would just add to the introductions a little bit about why we like data and my own background. Actually, a very long time ago, I thought I would be a researcher. And when I did my PhD, they try to get you to kind of commit to some form of research method. And I chose mixed methods. And mixed methods are a combination of what we call quantitative data, which we'll talk about today, and qualitative data. And then you mix them together in certain ways, and that's what they call mixed methods. And so you can probably tell that I'm a big fan of data in the work that we do around the census, which I think thanks to yourselves as fire chiefs and my amazing team, Annabelle and Ria and Zoe and all, is a really cool data initiative. And I hope you'll see how good the fire sector is and the fire chiefs are with data as we talk. But I'm going to stop here. And Jim, why don't you say a few words and then we'll get into the slides.
Yeah, thanks so much, team. And thanks, Greg and Paul, for the introduction, and also congratulations to CFC for putting on this leadership program. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to come together as fire chiefs and work on our skill set as leaders, and really happy to be involved in this part of it today. So thanks for the opportunity. So the introduction's already kind of giving the information of what I do in different parts of my life, but I'm happy to be here today because as a researcher, we we look at a lot of data sets, big set data sets. We generate data and we evaluate data. And I hope out of today's exercise, I get a little bit of an idea of the importance of being critical of data and not just taking data at face value. And sometimes there's really good data, sometimes there's really garbage data, and we have to try and sift through that to help in our decision-making process. Our decision-making sometimes is only as good as the quality of data that we involved in making a decision. I hope that it's, as Tina said, I hope it's fun today and I hope it's not too dry. But I think it's really important to have a chat about how we integrate information in our information or our decision making process. So really happy to be here. So I think we're good to go. So next slide, please, Annabelle. So essentially the what we're trying to get out of today is discuss data and define data and talk about how we integrate it into decision making. And as I mentioned already, really want to talk a little bit about analyzing data sets and analyzing the data before we accept it as important and relevant information. Um, and I think we all have developed, whether through official training or through learning on the job, we've developed skills around looking at data, and I think everyone here is probably does an excellent job of looking at data. So this is just a way to help maybe provide some more information, refine some skill sets, and then look at application. One of the things that just want to highlight up front is that when we're talking about decision making today, we're really not talking about the kind of acute decision making that we need to do on emergency scenes. That involves a different type of data analysis, and a lot of times we're dealing with incomplete data sets, and we're making decisions very rapidly as incident commanders, and that's a whole other skill set, to be honest, and probably could have an entire module dedicated to that. Today, I think we're focusing a little bit more on more like leadership style decision making and things that aren't done in the acute setting at an emergency scene. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page that's what we're talking about today, not so much the incident command style decision making, which can be a little bit different. So we're gonna involve some didactic presentation of information on data, and we're gonna involve a case, a scenario based case to kind of put a framework around some of the concepts, and then throughout the presentation today we'll have some opportunity for you to input some Menti input. I think everyone here is probably familiar with Menti, and I hope that you've been able to click on the link and get access to the Menti area, because we really value your thoughts and your engagement and your input. So that's kind of how we're going to go through the day. Go ahead, Annabelle, please. So, and this is a little bit about what I've already talked about. What we're going to talk about today is we're not teaching you how to make decisions. We're not teaching you how to be fire chiefs or how to be leaders. We're providing hopefully some valuable information that you can reflect on about the intersection between data and decision making as a leader in the fire service. So and once again, we're using this case-based scenario, a DIY case, to help highlight some different concepts and then importantly get your feedback and your thoughts around how you might engage with different situations and how you might incorporate data and the use of data in decision making. So and as importantly, the last point here is that we're not going to tell you what is the right thing to do. What is the right way to bring data in. Everyone, I think, has their own leadership. Well, everyone does have their own leadership style, which is a really good thing. And everyone probably metabolizes and utilizes data a little bit differently. So we're not going to prescribe specific ways. We're just going to highlight some concepts, and hopefully you can incorporate that into your own, decision-making leadership skills at your hall. Next slide. So this is the case, and this is the case that we'll use for today's exercise, and then in the part two of the module. So just to outline what the case is. As it says here, as a fire chief, you've been hearing concerns that a potentially toxic chemical is present in fire gear. Um, and you want to better consider and understand the issue. So that's it. You want to get information around this. You ask a firefighter and an analyst to prepare a report for you. So you task someone to generate data for you. And you want to give them guidance to prepare the report so you can have information that's needed to make a good decision for the department. So really, we identified an issue. You are tasking someone out and advising a couple people on generating information for you so you can better understand the issue and then help you start making decisions around how you're going to deal with the issue. Okay. So hopefully that's clear. It's relevant to things, lots of things that we're dealing with in the fire service these days. So hopefully it's a topical and relevant scenario and things to think about. So that's really the construct of the case that we'll go through. Okay, next slide, please. And then so the Menti question here is, what questions would you want to have asked about the bunker gear? So really, what how are you going to frame the acquisition of data? So in the Menti box, what questions do you want to ask to help start the data generation process? So just go ahead and submit your questions. Yeah. So answers, can the manufacturer guarantee the presence or absence of this chemical? We're not specifically for the purpose of the scenario calling it PFAS, but a potentially toxic chemical. I understand where you're going and respect that. How long is it exposed to fire and smoke? Does it contain harmful chemicals? What's the risk? Yeah, what standards is the gear certified? Are we dealing with currently certified and gear that meets the standards, or is it historic gear that some departments are still using? What other options? And yeah, what do we know about construction? These are all excellent. Excellent point. Do they have a fit for women? I saw an article very recently that a staggering percentage of female firefighters are not fitted properly. They're wearing gear that was not properly fit for them, and that's obviously a big issue. Yeah, great. What environmental conditions might exacerbate the issue? So in addition to the bunker gear itself, what are other kind of cofactors that may intersect with that? So these are all excellent. These are things that I had never, some of these are things I hadn't thought about. So these are really, really good. Just give a couple more seconds, just in case anyone is still thinking and wants to put down anything else. But these are great. Yeah, and we're going to have a number of Menti opportunities throughout the presentation today. So please feel free to really encourage the input. This is excellent. Are we seeing the same chemicals in other clothing? Yeah, that's a really good point. We talk about bunker gear being a specific repository for some chemicals, but are we also being exposed elsewhere and brand specific issues? Yeah, absolutely. That's great. All right, that's awesome. Thanks so much for the input. I think that frames kind of the where we want to go with this, and great engagement on that. So thanks very much. And now, Tina, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chief. All right, so where would a researcher start? Now you probably remember this diagram that you saw a very long time ago. So a novice researcher or an expert researcher usually, not always, but usually starts with a question, so you've generated some questions, does some background research, and then constructs a hypothesis or a guess about, or a focus about what they think is happening, and then designs an experiment to determine how to gather data on this topic, analyzes the data, comes out with some results and conclusions, and in an ideal world, it all gets solved. And of course, we don't live in the ideal world ever at all. So, this is what we call the scientific method. And in many ways, it applies in a lot of scenarios, but it's never as simple as this lovely diagram from Science Buddies would suggest. So the big question is, particularly for the bunker gear, but in most other situations as well, what if you can't design an experiment, which is the next slide. So now you don't have the experiment, right? Still have a question, or I still have some questions. I'm still going to do some background research. I might have some preconceived ideas of how things will work out or what the factors are or how things are, some guesses about what I believe to be true. Even though you're not doing the experiment yourself, you probably still have some access to some data from various sources, and you might analyze that, or you might just analyze different reports or sources of information and still come up with a report or something to guide you along. So that's what I think we're talking about more in this case, but some of you might tell us, no, we actually can do an experiment, and this is the experiment we would do. So there are lots of different ways, and like Jim said, no one right answer and no wrong answers. I think a lot of you have heard me say that before. So next slide. So the question here is, assuming you can't do an experiment, where would you start looking for your data? And Annabelle's going to put the next Menti question up. So I'll give you a minute. And we could have flipped the order a little bit because we didn't really start defining data. So just use whatever you think, whatever definition you think fits data. Where would you get your data from for this problem? Good. Good starting point. We can see the wheels turning. Not a lot of sources of data coming to mind. Good thing that we have NFPA, but there probably are some other sources of data. Okay. What do you think, Jim? You think we should give people, oh, whoa, there's a lot of sources of data.
Yeah. I saw a bunch of answers flashing up and then going away, so I think it was just a technical issue. Yeah, this is great. This is awesome.
Wow, thank you. Okay, let's see, what have we got here? So we saw NFPA, we saw other departments, we see manufacturers a lot of times. Definitely. Other organizations, internal records. Aha, we have an experiment here. Test the bunker gear after an active fire. IEFF. Online searches. Good. Yeah. Users, suppliers. These are terrific. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Should we refresh the technology again, or is research journals? Yeah. Excellent. Good. Okay, we're swimming along here. AI, yes, yes, we are going to turn into an AI country. So. Okay. Jim, should we stay here for a bit longer? You have anything you want to add here? Want to go on to the next?
I think it's good. Just on the AI, I think, that's one of the things we didn't really specifically include in the program today, looking at data, but I think it's something that is becoming an ever increasing source of data. I can tell you at the university, the students are using it extensively. Not just, everyone thinks it's all bad that they're just, getting AI to write the reports, and I'm sure there's a bit of that going on, but just the we have an unprecedented access to data now. You can
Mhm.
go to ChatGPT or other places and type in a question, and the AI engines will search just a multitude of databases in such a short period of time. So, the access to data, we've never had it to this level. And that's good in that we can access a lot of data, but the downside is that the AI engines can't discriminate between qualities, sources, validity of data. So as data floods in from those AI search engines, it's even more incumbent on us to vet the data. And I see that with the students when they bring data forward to me in the lab or whatever, and they have used AI. You can see such discrepancies. Some of the data is amazing and fantastic, and some of it is absolutely horrific garbage. And so it really raises the bar for us to really be responsible about vetting the data and having a critical eye to it. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of that going forward. But I'm glad I saw the AI come up because it's something that we're going to be faced with at an ever increasing level in the fire service and everywhere. So it's great. It's good point.
All right, go on to the next slide.
So yeah, so I'll tag in for a couple slides now. So we're going to talk about data now, and next slide, please, Annabelle. Um, so and we're just making you do some more work again, but before we start talking about data, what's your initial thoughts about what do you think about how do you talk about or think about data? What do you know about data?
In general, right, Jim?
Mhm. Yeah, just from a general perspective, what are your thoughts around data? What do you know about data? Compilation of information, absolutely, as its basic form, that's what it is. But yeah, these are great comments. It can be biased, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Can be dirty, yeah, good and bad. Facts and information. Yeah, that's important. Facts and information really is what data is, and then what we ascribe to it, the importance we give it, or we can give it power, we can characterize it, but you're right, data in its basic form is just information. Yeah, not all data is created equal. Absolutely. Tell a story. Too much to sift through. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. When we look at data, there can be giant data sets, and you look at some of the NFPA data sets, you're like, oh my goodness, how am I going to make sense of all this, right? So they can be the volume of it can be intimidating sometimes. So these are good. Garbage in, garbage out. Absolutely. Yeah, other concepts, data can be swayed if financially supported. So once again, it comes back to is there an agenda? Is there an inherent bias towards it? So analyzing confirmed. Absolutely. We need to vet it and test it. And we don't know the pool it can be pulled from. Yep, data should be able to be observed and measured, right? It should be sometimes data is quantifiable, as Tina mentioned before. Sometimes it's qualitative data, so it's more descriptive. But we should be able to measure the data regardless of whether it's a qualitative or quantitative. So it's good. Yeah, we will reveal patterns. So do we start to see emerging, consistent, types of information, and how do we use that? So yeah, these are great. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thanks so much for all the engagement here. This is what we really hope to get out of this. So this is fantastic. Thanks so much. So I think we can go back to the slides now, Annabelle. Thanks so much, and then we'll move on. So we'll start to talk a little bit now about the nuts and bolts of data. So we talk about primary, secondary data. So primary data or secondary data really is data that's generated for a purpose. A lot of times it's hypothesis driven. So we generate a hypothesis, we do some experiments, we generate information or data, and then we check the data against what our hypothesis was initially. There's lots of different repositories of data. So out there, and as Tina mentioned before, every time we want information, we don't have to go and do the experiment ourselves. Many times that's not feasible. We don't have the equipment or expertise or whatever. So there's lots of repositories of data, peer-reviewed research papers. Someone mentioned that in Menti a little while ago. So that's an academic, non-peer-reviewed publication. So there's just because it didn't go through peer review doesn't mean it's not data that's worthy of evaluation. And there are lots of search engines out there. If it's a medical thing, PubMed, Google Scholar, universities oftentimes have data repositories themselves. Chat GPT, somebody already brought that up. That's a way we can search and access information. So there's lots of different ways to access primary, secondary data sources. And then, Tina mentioned this already, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is descriptive information. Quantitative is more basic information that, has oftentimes numerical values associated with it. So it quantifies response. It provides levels of data information that we can go and we can do a mathematical analysis on typically. So and we can have, just because it's numerical doesn't mean it's quantitative. Numerical can also have a descriptive quality to it. So even if we don't do a statistical analysis, numerical data can still provide quantitative information. Data can be word or images. So we often think of data just as numbers, giant sets of numbers, but images, really the way that we think about data is a very broad term. Having a conversation with someone is getting data. Okay, looking up. We're talking about bunker gear. Looking at images of different types of bunker gear provides information, provides data. So it's not always just numerical information that constitutes data, which is often what we think of. And statistical versus descriptive, and then research grade. So really, and this starts to come down to how we evaluate data. Has there been a statistical vetting of the data? Did the data need to be statistically analyzed or not? And sometimes the data, it requires, if we want to look and see, is the data real or valid, sometimes we need to do statistical analysis. A lot of times qualitative data doesn't align itself with statistical analysis. So really the type of information that we're looking for, we really have to kind of align the way we evaluate or critically analyze the data can change based on the type of data. Go ahead, Annabelle.
Jim, can I just add one thing
Yeah,
on
please
that
do. Please
slide?
do.
I don't know if everyone knows what we mean when we're talking about vetting it statistically versus numbers that are descriptive. So I wondered if I could give an example here.
Please do.
Yeah, okay. So if you consider, for example, in the Great Canadian Fire Census, sometimes you see numbers that are going up and down year over year. So a statistician might want to know, are those increases and decreases due to chance, or are they due to something other than chance, right? Because you could see increases and decreases, but it just might be kind of random variation. So the statistical tests that are often done help to determine if something is due to something other than chance, right? So researchers are very, very concerned about things that they call p-values. And I know, Jim, you're going to talk about this a little bit later in terms of what does that mean when we say something is statistically significant. So yeah, so sometimes you'll have numbers and they will be analyzed, and that's great, and that's a descriptive account, and that's what we do in the census. And then sometimes you will have numbers that are analyzed through statistical methods to talk about whether it's due to chance or something other than chance. And then sometimes you're going to have research grade evidence. So when, for example, Dr. Petrik and his colleagues are publishing in peer-reviewed journals, their peer reviewers are looking at all their statistics and their p-values and, how many people did you have in your sample, and all of these, or not people, how many whatever you study you have in your sample. Um, Versus, sometimes it's fine just to have improvement grade evidence. So you might have, this is the type of evidence that I need to be able to advance a policy position or make an improvement in my organization. And even in places like hospitals, that is fine as well. So that's what some of those terms mean. I just thought I'd add that, Jim. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that, Tina. Yeah, that's a great description of the role of importance of stats for sure. Okay, yep, perfect. So there's lots of perceptions about data and its utility and some of the cons of data out there. But data can be cheap, data can be really expensive. I can attest that generating some data can be very expensive. Some of the experiments we run are, super expensive, but there's other data generation that doesn't cost a lot of money. And so the financial investment in the generation of the data doesn't correlate necessarily to the validity of the data. So it's not just because it was expensive means it's better. So it's something to be, um, you know, concerned about. Data can be rich or not. So rich or not rich really means, how fulsome is the data? Is it just a basic small data set? Are there other contributing factors that really it kind of highlights the data and it really expands the information we get from the data set? It can tell a story, which can be truthful, fact, or fiction. And one thing that information can be is it can be really useful. Sometimes information really doesn't generate a lot of value to the situation that you're investigating, and can be helpful or harmful. And so sometimes data is really helpful in illuminating a situation. Sometimes data can be used for, not altruistic reasons, and the negative data sets and data can be used to really paint negative pictures. So there's lots of different ways that we can look at and use data. We had a great response already. A number of people brought up bias. So that's something that when we're looking at information from a critical lens, bias is something that we want to evaluate to see if there's a chance that it may be influencing the data. We've talked about numerical and non, so there's lots of different types of data. And the quality of the data is something that we need to always be mindful of. And in some cases, it's hard. If I'm looking in an area, a different area of science that I'm not really well versed in, it's outside of my normal area of focus. It's hard for me sometimes to assess the quality of the data because I don't understand the context of what really constitutes strong versus weak data. So it's something that we need to generate some experience with. And lots of us have been in the fire service for a long time, so I think we have a bit of an idea of what might constitute strong versus weak data. And then, there's these phrases, there's not enough evidence to suggest, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But sometimes it can be a cop out. You have a position, and you're like, well, there's not enough evidence to suggest this or that, so I'm just going to go ahead in the absence of information or data, which can be problematic. And then there's this concept of generalizing interpretations of data. So and I see this. I do it. I've done it before. My colleagues do it. You find some data and then you make all of these generalizations and assumptions on the data. So the data starts out this big and then you make it this big because of your generalization. So that can be problematic as well. So really just I think what the take home message here is that we really want to highlight the importance of recognizing the value of data, but also data has limits. The what you can get out of a set of data oftentimes has limits, and if we go beyond that, we're making assumptions and inferences on things that aren't really supported by the data. So it's something to keep in mind. Next slide, please, Annabelle. Um, just a Menti question here. Where would the fire department get data for your bunker gear problem? And I know that it may be a little bit similar to the question we asked before, but um, so after we've talked a little bit more about data, now does that change any of your thoughts around where you're going to go to get data? Perfect. Work safe. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent resource. Terrific.
Mm.
Yeah, lots of great resources there. Yeah, and it's a good point. Other departments that have already researched it, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? If it's a problem that other departments may have faced, then reaching out to other fire chiefs or deputy chiefs or training officers or whomever, union people in some cases, um, can be really informative. So if someone's already put a lot of work into it, then the fire service is very collaborative, I find. So it's great to reach out to other departments to get some help. Yep, test the gear, the manufacturers, provide the specifications on the gear, so that can be a great spot to start as well. So yeah, these are great, excellent responses. Yep, OHS, perfect. Okay, we can go forward. Okay, Tina, I'll turn it over to
All
you.
right. Thanks, Jim. So let's talk about some databases that you probably know exist, but may not know the backstory about. Okay, so and some of these are related to CFC, some of these have nothing to do with CFC. So well before my time, probably during when Chief Wessano was president and others, and CFC and the fire marshals and fire commissioners had done this beautiful project called the National Fire Information Database. You can see some of the photographs of these people. You probably know them. So this project is a pilot project. It was very, very influential in helping CFC figure out what it was going to do next. So it was kind of the precursor to the census. So the NFID is a database that, we actually don't give it away very easily. If you did ask Annabelle for it, she'd probably give it to you. But it is a pilot data set. And so what they meant by pilot was that the intention was to see, how would this work? How could we set it up? And so it is based on 10 years of data from 2005 to 2015. It has data from not all provinces and territories, but some of them. And we learned a lot by doing this data set. So this data set is huge. It has 82 data elements, and the elements are very, very precisely specified. So if it says, how many fires? Well, it says exactly what type of fire and what type of vehicle and, what was the cause and all of these items. So in some ways, it's very precise, and they tried to get common definitions of these data points across the provinces and territories that participated. I don't know if the territories participated. I think it was 6 or 7 provinces that participated. The problem, and this is okay because it was a pilot, so we were learning, was that is only 40% complete. So this pilot didn't include everybody for various reasons, but it's okay. In a pilot, you don't have to have everybody. You're just trying things out. But of the 82 data elements, if you look within the data element, there was not enough data within the element to have it be really useful. And so when Chief Petrik talks about data being cheap and expensive, this is an example. You could pay a lot of money to get a lot of data, and then you can't get out of it as much as you want, right? So the planning committee was very clear. This is not administrative data. You don't use this to take to your council. You don't use this to make decisions in real time. But it was extremely useful for research purposes. Some very beautiful research projects came out of that. And they are on the NFID website. So if you go to nfid.ca, you can find those research studies. But more importantly, this project really taught all of us in the fire sector, the fire marshals, fire commissioners, and fire chiefs and the CFC board and staff about what parts of this worked really well and what parts were really difficult. And so this idea that, you have to support people. If you're going to ask people to give you data, you have to give them support. You have to make it easy. You have to make it social. And these are some of the elements that we carried through. You also have to be able to turn it around quickly. So this, the last data point was in 2015. The first data set was released in 2018. So there was already a lag time by the time we got it out. So anyway, something about the NFID, a great project and something that we all learned a lot from. So the next slide, please. Same thing in the US. It's funny, we all go through these growing pains, but this was really interesting in the US because they used to have a national fire information system. I think they might still, but it is being, I think, changed into another system that we'll talk about. But the interesting thing about the US data system is that it is tied to a carrot, a very big carrot. So if you don't submit your data, you don't get your grant. Well, gee, that's a great way to avoid the problem that the NFID had with only 40% of completed data elements, right? So you've given people an incentive to generate the data. So the critical success factors is they had an app, they had much more funding, they have coordination and incentives. No data, no grant. So these are some of the things to think about if you are looking at your own data systems. Next slide. Okay, and I'll try to go quick because I know we're running out of time. I think there was one right before. Yeah, right, near us. So this is the item that actually at last year's fire rescue or the year before, I can't remember. Dr. Laurie Moore Merrill told the CFC board and NAC about and the Metro Chiefs. The US is moving to this NERIS system, the National Emergency Response Information System. It has two things that are different about it. One is that it goes beyond fire and includes emergency management data points, but also that it doesn't rely on defining the data points. So it's not like, here is the definition of this data element that we want you to collect. It allows people to enter situational data and then, I guess, using the technology or AI type mechanisms, it returns data set, which reduces the data collection burden. So I think they're just at the beginning of that, and it's something that we would want to watch for. Next slide. Yeah, this is the Great Canadian Fire Census. So Annabelle is in my favorite, and I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who has been completing the census, who is completing the census. This is probably the most powerful data set that we can use in Ottawa for lobbying purposes. The media loves it. I hope it's useful to your organizations, but I'll just point out a couple of things here. First of all, there are no carrots and no sticks to this. People do it because they just care about the information in the sector. And the questions that are asked are not research grade questions, all right? So we wouldn't want to sit and debate with a methodologist about this, but we can say, for our purposes, this points you in the right direction. This is the approximate number of fire departments. This is what fire chiefs are saying about the key issues, etc. And one of the things that was most successful about this early on was it started not as a data initiative. It started as a social initiative. So when it was the Answer the Call committee, the Chief Mackenzie's committee started this with one question. How many volunteer firefighters do we have, right? And since then, it has grown and grown. So the point about this is that you don't need a lot of money to generate your data. You need a lot of goodwill, which you've all given this, and certainly the direction of the board and the NAC and yourselves as departments. And we always say data is not just for geeks, it's also for cliques. It has a social component to it. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at data sets. Next slide. You all know the CAFC website, so I'm going to go super quick because I've really probably taken too long in other ones, but this is another great data set in fire. I don't think it has anything related to the bunker gear case, but it's still important for you to know. The next one is wildfire sat. So at you can go to the next slide, Annabelle. At the G7 meeting, there was a commitment to share internationally Canada's wildfire sat investment. And so one of the things we're telling the federal government about in this data set is, well, how are the fire chiefs going to use this, right? To be able to use satellite data for wildfire prediction. So something that you should be aware about as well in data sets. I think that it was the end of them, Jim, but yeah, we might have to speed through the rest, but I know we can do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next slide,
Thanks.
please, Annabelle.
Mhm.
So we're going to talk a little bit about research. So when we're engaging with research, I think this is where it comes down to critical evaluation. Who conducted the studies? What were they trying to achieve? Was there any like bias in inherent bias, and already kind of alluded to some of the facts that if funding is tied to production of results, then there's this pressure to generate data, whatever it may be. So it's important to understand the kind of, if you can identify what some of the preconceived notions may or may not have been with that. Was this an agenda-driven research project? Was the research generated by a company that's affected by the outcome of the research? There's lots of different reasons why. And researchers, we're trained to generate data, and inherently we're trained to generate objective, unbiased data. But we're also trained to create a story and sell a story so we can get grant funding. So, there's nuances to data, and I think it's important to, as you're reviewing data, to just try and get a feel for, how unaffected does the data seem to be from potential biases. Next slide. And when we look at data, we have to understand what some of the data means. So we're looking at variables, we're looking at things that are being tested, and we can classify. When you look at different types of data, there's dependent variables. So what are we measuring? Independent variables are things that, what are you specifically changing? So when we're doing an experiment, we change a parameter, and then we look to see what happens with the dependent variables, et cetera. There's co-founding. So, are there other things going on within that experiment that are really kind of affecting what the outcome might be? So we need to be sensitive to that. Causality versus correlation. A lot of times people will make the mistake of saying, I saw, we did this and we saw that, so that therefore that means that, this caused that. And that's not always the case. Sometimes there was, an outcome happened not because of the original intervention, but just was a circumstantial outcome. So we have to be a little bit careful of that. We already talked about there's not enough evidence to suggest that. It doesn't mean that opinions can be validated or refuted just because you say, well, I don't have enough evidence. There's not enough evidence to support my claim or refute my claim, so we'll just go with it. And if we need to do research, we have to determine sometimes whether we need to do research or additional research to identify an outcome or a trend, or in some cases there's already lots of information out there to identify a position and defend a position. So we'll move to the next slide, please. And this is you, Tina.
Yeah, great. So just in the interest of time, this is a piece I wrote early on when I came on board at CAFC because I was noticing that many researchers were influencing building codes, mental health funding, and so on and so forth. And our sector is extraordinarily polite, and researchers are very polite too. But there's a whole lot of money that goes into a whole lot of research. And so, yeah, just really feeling comfortable and confident to be able to use the points that Jim talked about, that sometimes research is probably not going to answer the question that you have, because research in general is about generalizability, and strategic questions that organizations need to ask should be informed by the research, but the specifics of your case are going to be really important. So trying to balance those, and this article has some questions that you could ask a researcher. But, I think the bottom line is very seldom does one person's particular study give you all the information that you need. So those are just considerations, but we'll move on in the interest of time. So this is a report that you're going to find archived on the federal government's website. And it really is about what happens when you don't have enough information to make a decision. And that happens a lot. So it comes from a public health perspective. It's called the precautionary principle. And it's sort of saying, well, do you just like stop because you don't have enough data? And so this precautionary principle sort of gives a way to deal with the lack of data or the data that you don't have. And it has principles like, okay, well, put the onus on the proponent to be able to change, or consider the safety issue, right? If there's a safety issue, and just trying to figure out what to do when you're in that often gray zone of not enough information. Next slide. I'm not sure we have time for this,
Yeah,
Minty, but we might, Jim. I don't know. What do you think?
um, yeah, sure. We can go and do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, so in the bunker gear case scenario, what variables are you likely to intersect with? So what variables within the data set, within the data that you'll be experiencing or identifying, what do you think are some of the different variables that you'll find? Yeah, good amount of use. Yeah, for sure. Personal interest. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. These are all excellent, right? So these are all variables that can kind of impact what the outcome is, what the ultimate data set is. These are some of the variables that can be very relevant to what information is determined within that particular study. Yeah, excellent. Cleaning, contractual services, reason for use. Yeah, absolutely. Is the gear being used for the intended use, or are we using it for other things? You know, compliance, so gear cleaning and decontamination and all those different things, ensuring compliance, storage protocols. Yeah, absolutely. These are fantastic. Uh, um, Cost per unit, right? And that's actually an interesting one. We had replaced bunker gear not so long ago, and kind of did an informal investigation in terms of cost, the cost of the gear versus, contaminants, et cetera. And there's some interesting outcomes with that. Yeah, perfect. Fit and sizing. Yeah, you're right. Has it been professionally fit and sized for the individuals or not? Because that can be really impactful in terms of exposure. So these are all absolutely fantastic. So I think we'll maybe go back to the slides now, just in the interest of time. Thanks. Next slide, please, Annabelle. Yeah. So and this slide is just kind of a cartoon outlining or highlighting that just because we go and accumulate a bunch of data, that's just not the end of it, right? We get data now. Now, what do we do with that information? What do we do with the data? And this is where we start connecting dots and we start identifying patterns and we look for causal relationships. We look for things, variables that impact other variables to generate an outcome. And ultimately, what we want to do is go through this process of ultimately towards wisdom, where we identify what is the research question, what is the reason we're looking for information, and how does the data within those papers really, within the context of our original question, how does that generate new knowledge and new wisdom? So really, once you get the data, that's really just the start of the process, right? How do you evaluate, examine, and integrate the information that you get? Next slide, please. And so what do you do with the data? And that's a really important thing. Why did you go get the data in the first place? Are you taking it to present to council for needs? We need to get new bunker gear because of this, and this. What are the limitations of the data? Whenever students bring data to me, I always say, it's great you bring the data, but what are your perceived limitations of the data? I want them to understand what the data said, and then also what the data couldn't tell them. So really important to evaluate it from that perspective as well. And then, what are the cautions, and how do you process? So how do you metabolize? How do you integrate the data based on the context of why you asked the question in the first place? Next slide, please, Annabelle. And Tina.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Annabelle. So this session, we talked about data. In the next session, we're going to talk about how to take the bunker gear case from the data to knowledge, decision making, and even including some of the ethical issues that might be included in that. So there are more slides in this slide deck, but I think in the interest of time, we can probably just stop at this point. Next session, we're going to take the case a little bit further and talk about how we're going to use information, how you process it, how it's analyzed, how it's used in decision making, and then the ethical issues as well. So I think with that, we will have finished just 1 minute over, but I think we're pretty much there. Jim, did you want to add anything to conclude?
Yeah, no, just thanks for the attention. Thanks so much for the engagement with the Menti questions. It was really meaningful. It's great to see the answers. Lots of things I hadn't thought about. So yeah, it was really valuable for me as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We're done, Chief.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much. One, for being very prompt and on time for those who have challenges in their schedule that can't stay for questions. But we do have time for questions as per normal. So if anyone wants to type questions and put them into the chat, I'm happy to try and facilitate that conversation between Jim and Tina. I almost felt as you were giving your end synopsis on the presentation, it was like that commercial was going to pop up and say to be continued, like for the next series. Like I'm dating myself, but going back to like a Happy Days episode or something that was going to go into the next one. So I thought that was a pretty excellent segue as far as stay tuned for more and how we apply it this way. I thought that was excellent.
If you got happy days out of a session on data, Chief, we're really happy.
Well, And you mentioned it. You mentioned it earlier. I mean, I did have the distinct pleasure. It was under the leadership at the time of Steve Gamble as president of the CAFC. I
Yeah.
happened to be vice president at the time, but I was actually Harold Potier, I believe, was the representative from CCFMC, and the announcement for NFID was made in Halifax at the time in 2013. So, and Len Garris obviously did a considerable amount of work from an academia standpoint on the need for a Canada-specific national database process. So yeah, thinking back to over 12 years ago, it's quite the time frame to think about where we've gone, but still evolving with data and data sets. So just looking at the chat, there's a few people that have said had to run, but thank you very much for the presentation. Great presentation from Samantha. Christine Greer, not a question, just hello to Chief Jim from a former Guelphite.
Awesome.
I'm hopeful I have that appropriate. I've never heard of Guelphite. I've heard of graphite before, but Guelphite will take.
That's awesome.
Now living and working in Manitoba. So thank you, Christine, for that. I'm sure Jim appreciates the shout out.
Absolutely.
Any questions specifically for Jim or Tina? It's not to suggest by any means that it might be suggesting you did such a great job that there wasn't questions up to this point, but I think it does kind of lend itself a little bit to the fact that there's more to come. And I think a lot of the questions people have is seeing how it develops and relates into the next session, and how you take some of the, I'll call it the foundation or critical elements that you spoke about today, and how it then gets extrapolated even further to take it along that path that's so necessary to make it work.
Yeah. Well,
Emily has also said expression of gratitude, Jim, for your work in cancer, especially for female firefighters. And I would echo those sentiments. Not only from a doctor standpoint and just research and development, but you've clearly dedicated a genuine and sincere passion from a personal level and applied that to the fire services that so many of us are very appreciative to. So again, Emily, thank you for that, and I would echo those sentiments.
Thanks. Thank you very much. It's an honor to do it. I feel fortunate to be able to have this intersection with the cancer research and the fire. I never thought there would be this kind of meeting. But I'm ecstatic that there is, and I just get to work with great people, and it's amazing.
Excellent. I mean, the one question I have, and it always comes up, is the correlation versus causation component. And it's a very, very broad and generalized statement, but I think it's so very pertinent. What do you see as one of the, I guess, one of the main focus areas where correlation and causation in a fire sector environment can be so very applicable, and how can you create that determination one versus the other? Maybe I'll ask that of both of you. And it's very high level. It can be 30,000-foot level, because the question's kind of 30,000-foot level in its sense. But if there's anything you can add just on that general perspective, because we hear it all the time, and some of us who are not deep into the data sets, we hear that and we kind of consider it like a catchphrase type thought process. What is your own personal feelings towards that statement, and then kind of next steps with that? I'll start with Jim, and then maybe Tina thereafter.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That honestly, that's the $1 million question. When we look at data, we're looking for if A, affects B, and then we get C, then we naturally assume that's a causal relationship. But I'm just trying to think of a really good example specifically in the fire service. So I'll keep ruminating on that. But one thing we have to be really careful about is that lots of times things happen just coincidentally, and the impact of A on B really didn't have anything to do with C, but there were other variables going on at the same time that resulted in C, and that's a big issue. In terms of, we're talking about our specific thing with the bunker gear, and I've seen lots of reports on this, lots of different research papers, and I'll tell you, there's so much different perspectives on this, and you can look in the literature and find anything. I can find research papers that would probably tell you that the sky is not blue. It's so there's a lot of information in this bunker gear. I've seen reports that say, well, you know what, the contaminants in bunker gear isn't just because of the bunker gear. The people that have higher incidence of contaminants in their bunker gear are people that respond to more calls and go into more situations, and it's just passive absorption. So those people would say, well, there's not a causal relationship. There's not, and so those studies usually are very flawed in terms of the amount of data that they collect. But establishing causality is actually not a trivial thing. It's very hard and for experiments we do in our lab, it's actually very hard to have enough control over the variables to prove or disprove that A plus B equals C. And because you have to minimize the amount of confounding variables that are out there. And so going forward, I'm sorry, I don't have a specific answer. I'm just kind of blanking on that right now, Paul. But um, when we evaluate data, I think one of the most important things we can do is say, okay, what are the actual variables that are changing? What are they controlling? What are they seeing change? And then are there other variables that are just hanging around that really aren't pertinent to that situation that are probably causing issues in terms of interpretation of the data? And we like to see experimental outlines that are as clean as possible. And a lot of times that's not the case. So that, I just looking at the number of variables, if you have 100 different variables that are in flux, it's very hard to prove a causal relationship. A lot of times it's just associative or anecdotal.
No, and thank you for that, Jim. And the one of the things that came to mind most for that is in advocating and trying to be a fairly well informed individual in the fire sector relating to the one way out or single means of egress components. As an example, there are so many elements or variables that when you talk about human behaviors and or historical and expected outcomes or thought processes to the way people have grown up through two means of exiting and two means of egress in most of their previous life experiences, to think about how that can all of a sudden change and now correlate to a single means of egress, and how does that identify changes in their human behavior that could impact fire safety and or evacuation process or shelter in place mechanisms. I was just trying to kind of correlate the two because I'm dealing with that right now, trying to best represent the CAFC with the task force as an example.
Right.
So I know it's not the bunker gear piece, but
No.
I think you really hit the nail on the head on there's so many variables that aren't necessarily measurable for A plus B to equal C
Yeah.
that and the biases component, whether it be the Jensen Hughes report or something along those lines,
Mhm.
there's often those elements there. And I apologize, Tina, I kind of cut you off before you
Yeah.
got to speak on the topic, but I wanted you to know where my thought was coming from, not only to maximize the time with a great presentation of speakers and to ask questions, but just to trying to put a twist specifically in that area.
Yeah. Well, Chief, that's such a great example of correlations and causality, right? Because there will be some people who look at single egress, and I had the benefit of having the time while you and Jim were talking, so I started to think about this a little more. But um, so if you were to map that out, the single egress problem, some people would say, well, does single egress cause more deaths, right? Or God forbid, or more accidents or more injuries? Okay, you could look at that, but chances are there's going to be other things that are intervening and affecting. But the example that I thought of while you were talking was mental health injuries. So we know in our community, there's more first responder mental health injuries than in the general population. So somebody might think being a first responder causes mental health injuries, right? Okay, but we know from the research that there's often other things going on. There are things that are protective. Maybe, maybe there are other things that are happening in the workplace that exacerbate that situation. Or maybe the fact that there's more mental health injuries has to do with the fact that there are more exposures, right, than the average person. So when you say, it may not be the exposure that has caused the injury, but it might be that the more exposures that you have, the more likely you are to have an injury. So that's the correlation, right? So one variable is going in one direction, the number of times you are exposed, and the other variable, the number of first responders with injuries, is going up. So somebody might say, oh, well, it's being a first responder that creates the injury, but no, that's not true. That's right. That's an example of the correlation. Another example might be, and I saw a research study the other day that was saying, if people feel that management is problematic, they will have more work stress. Okay, that could be true. But it also that there could be a negative perception, right? So it could be that the person is feeling negatively, so they perceive things negatively. So you can't say one causes the other, right? They're just correlated. So it's such an interesting question, but we should map it out for single egress too. Thank you for
Yeah,
the
no,
question.
thank you both very much for the input on that. And as I say, I love hearing other people's perspective on it, but there are so many variables to anything that we have in the fire sector that are often. I think that maybe one thing that we can surmise and conclude is that regardless of correlation and causality, data sets in themselves are valuable because no matter what is taking place, mapping out the path could not happen appropriately if the data doesn't exist and you're not getting the aggregate data in the appropriate format in
Yeah.
order to be able to utilize it. And I think that's where many of us within the fire service are learning from. Jim has that perspective from a professional basis, but now sees how those elements can provide the foundational basis for sound decision making in the fire service with good data and how it's applied. We just had I will dare say I don't want to say heated, but I will say a lively discussion at council over fireworks and fireworks banning. And to your point, does fireworks in itself create injury and or death just by itself? The answer might be no. However, when you start putting in different elements of individuals buying consumer fireworks who've never been trained or never received safety information, is the individual beyond 18 years of age? Are they considered, an adult, and are they certified under any kind of program and all those things? Like there's so many different depths of layers that it changes the argument and that perception initially what might be there.
Yeah.
So
That's such, I couldn't agree with you more, Paul. And I think that really goes back to what's the specific question that you want to ask? Like what is the information that you're getting? What's the context of the question? Because if the question is, if your question is, do fireworks inherently cause harm, damage, or death? You're right. Maybe the question is no. But if the question is, are fireworks associated with negative outcomes in the community? Well, that's a very different question, right? So
yeah,
so the data that you find, it really needs to be in the context of what is your specific question, because the data only makes sense based on the question you ask, and those are two very different questions with possibly very different outcomes when you evaluate the data. So you raise a really good point. All right, is the what ultimately are you trying to learn about? What ultimately question are you trying to ask and get answers on? So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and there's
Excellent.
an element of, don't, like y'all say, don't doubt in the dark what you saw in the light, because if you're seeing a correlation, it doesn't really matter that they caused, you're seeing a correlation. And so it begs the policymaker, the decision maker to go back and say, okay, what else is going on in there? Because the two are correlated, right?
Yeah.
So even if it's not causal, it's definitely worth exploring more. It requires further exploration. Mm.
Thank you, everyone who's still remaining, and for your participation on this. You will certainly see the follow-up correspondence from Annabelle moving forward, and we look forward to the next time that we have our leadership development module session. So with that, everyone have a great day. Thank you so much for attending.
Thanks,
Stay safe.
Paul. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Annabelle.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mia.
So,
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
bye.